Okay. Welcome everyone to the regular bi-monthly meeting of the Marin Municipal Water District Board of Directors. I am Board Vice President Cynthia Kohler, sitting in for Board President Jack Gibson, who's unavailable this evening. I'm looking for a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved. Second.
Is there any public comment on the agenda?
At this time, I do not see any public comments. I'm sorry though, but can you repeat who was the first person to make the motion and who seconded?
Armando first, Bragman second.
Thank you.
Although it could be debated.
It was a photo. It was a photo.
But let's not. So there's no public comment on the agenda. We are now looking for a roll call vote on the agenda. Adoption of the agenda.
Thank you. Director Bragman.
Aye.
Director Quintero.
Aye.
Director Russell.
Aye.
And Vice President Kohler.
Aye.
Thank you.
We're now moving on to the moment for public expression on any item that is not already on the agenda. Do we have any public expression comments?
Vice President Kohler, I do not see any at this time.
Okay, that moves us on to directors and general manager announcements. I'll just go around. Director Bragman.
Nothing at this time, thanks.
Director Quintero.
Nothing at this time.
Director Russell.
Nope.
I will just very briefly announce, I guess, that I wanted to share with you that I was appointed this week to the US EPA's Environmental Finance Advisory Board. So that's a FACA committee that I'll be serving on for the next 2 years. So bring all of your environmental finance issues to me. Ben, did you have any general manager announcements?
I do have a couple brief comments this evening. The first one I wanted to share with the board that our employee, in fact, our only employee so far who has tested positive for COVID is now out of the hospital and is feeling better. That's great news. And we have had no community spread from that incident. That reflects staff is really doing a great job following all the protocols. The second item I wanted to share is yesterday was the first day that Natalie Coffin Green Park, the road going down there, was closed to cars, pedestrians, and bikes in order to allow our contractor for the Ross Reservoir landslide repair project to safely haul material to the project site. The closure occurred yesterday and today without incident, and the operation is going to continue with the closure in place for approximately the next 4 weeks, from 7 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Monday through Friday, and it'll be open in the following that period of time and on weekends. That's all I have.
Okay, great to know about the staff, by the way. And so let me commend you and the executive team for your great work, and all the staff for pulling together. I know it's a very challenging time. This brings us to the consent calendar. I'm looking for a motion to approve.
Motion to approve.
I was trying to be polite.
Yes, it was I. The polite
Snooze you
argument.
lose. Snooze you lose.
Second.
All right, did you get that, Terry?
Yes, I did.
Okay, then we're looking for, oh, sorry, is there any public comment on the consent calendar?
At this time, there are none.
Okay, then we need a roll call vote.
Sure. Director Bragman.
Aye.
Director Quintero.
Aye.
Director Russell.
Aye.
And Vice President Kohler.
Aye. Okay, that brings us to the regular calendar and item 5, which is lessons learned from the 2017 North Bay fires.
Okay, that item is mine. Given the time of year approaching, in fact, probably now in the fire season here in Northern California, it's appropriate to bring this presentation to the board. In fact, President Gibson, who's not here tonight, had seen the presentation at a North Bay Watershed Association meeting and asked me to bring this to the board. I've given this presentation a whole number of times at industry associations and water agencies throughout the US, and I'm always say yes when requested to give it. Of course, I would say yes here anyway, but I just wanted to share. The reason is, and it's part of the context of this presentation, is unlike probably everything else we do in this industry, we learn from experience, often learn from mistakes, and natural disasters just don't come, fortunately, that frequent to build that level of expertise from learning as you go. So hearing from folks that experienced it, in this case myself, has been valuable for the industry. So I do this. I don't profess to be an expert in emergency response. It's really my personal experience while I was in the role of director of water of Santa Rosa Water, which is an enterprise department in the city of Santa Rosa. And I was here for about 5 months on the job there when this event occurred. And then thinking about the district, we're now preparing, as you know, for PSP events, PSPS, potential outage events in the midst of a pandemic, all at the same time always aware that a natural disaster could occur, wildfire or earthquake. So a lot of preparation work on all fronts continue. With that, I'll go to sharing my screen and roll through the presentation. Okay, so far so good. Santa Rosa Water really deals with all aspects of water, from wastewater to potable water to stormwater, flood control, an agency comparable to the size of the district in terms of staff. So this presentation, I'll roll through the fires themselves, the response, the impact, and talking about some of the lessons learned in all of this, and the recovery, including a water quality contamination issue that we puzzled through for quite some time. First and foremost, this was a tragic and devastating event. Being there and seeing it hit the community, but also the staff that largely lived in the city in a very difficult way as we worked through this. A fire raged on and off for 4+ days. There were some tragic fatalities in the county and in the city. About 5% of the housing stock was destroyed, and just countless heroic efforts from the staff of Santa Rosa, including a whole number of people whose home burned down and showed up to work, or whose family evacuated, went one direction and they showed up for work. It was really just a privilege to witness that aspect of it. So the fires, I just have some photos that bring it a little bit home, at least for me. Every community has an iconic feature, and Santa Rosa had the round barn. And you just heard it a lot, go to the round barn and make a left, or, you know, this pub's by the round barn. And well, when that caught on fire, you just felt an audible gasp of everyone in the emergency operations center. And you actually just felt it from the community as well, in a way. It was just a very big moment. This is a photo of a Kmart complex, and the reason I'm showing it is just somewhat illustrative of what occurred from a water utility perspective. So if you imagine the fire approaching a Kmart or any other large commercial place or hotel where you have a maze of fire sprinklers, interior fire sprinklers, as the fire starts, the sprinklers kick on, and then in this case, the building burned down, and your feed line to your interior sprinklers, probably a 6-inch line, then was flowing unimpeded. So as you'll hear, throughout the fire, we lost pressure and lost water, of course, at a terrible time for firefighting. And it really took us quite some time to figure out what was happening and how to get pressure back into the system. This is a photo of, and you may have seen some of this, where the fire breached 101. So this is looking east as it was coming east to west. And when you see something like this, you realize the notion of fire breaks is at times just that, right? To just breach a freeway like that. And this is one of the devastating impacts. This is Coffee Park, kind of a bedroom community in the flats of Santa Rosa, never considered to be prone to wildfires. And you see the devastation. This is a photo of the Kaiser Hospital complex after the fire, which to share a moment during the fire chief, Tony, who is kind of right out of central casting, came into the emergency operations center, this very large room, and, you know, ash on his face. I mean, real deal, right? Kind of a cloud almost following him. And he looked around intently and looked my way and started to walk towards me. And I looked behind me and there was no one there. And he kept coming and I stood up, Tony. And he said, I need water. And this is like day 2, maybe day 3 of the fire. I said, Ben, I need pressure. We have to evacuate Kaiser Hospital and I don't have enough pressure. And, you know, we scrambled and you can tell he was able to protect the hospital and see the evacuation through. But I'll tell you, that moment is something you'll never forget. So that's an overview in succinct way of what we went through for about 4+ days. So the response, every time I give this, it is impactful to me. So this, I tell folks, is probably the most telling slide of this whole thing, where responding to emergency is all about adaptive management. And unfortunately, it's something they never tell you in all the FEMA training you can go to. And you have your nice structure and you think you have a plan, but your plan is never going to fit the nature of the emergency. And built into the structure, I share with folks, including here, of course, who's going to be the one to look and think about and adaptively manage and fit the plan for the circumstances you're actually dealing with. And again, Eisenhower had a similar quote, and both come from wartime, which is never being in that, but it felt as close as you'd want to get. Emergency response is very complicated in structures and names and titles. At the end of the day, it's largely about 2 things: communications and resources. Communications with people and the public, and also field instrumentation that, of course, in this digital age, we're so dependent on, but you can lose immediately, and you really are not practiced how to run a system essentially totally blind. Never mind how to figure out your situational awareness of what's going on in the field. And then a whole range of resources needs. The one big mistake I made was on mutual aid. You know, you're just so focused on the moment. It took us quite a few days before we said, boy, let's call mutual aid that we're all part of. It's a great system in California. And as soon as we made the call, trucks were rolling to give us some relief and some support we needed. So a very complex, whoops. So some key lessons learned in terms of response, who's in charge. And this district, like most water utilities, are used to being in charge. And an event like this is regional in nature. Very quickly, the county's in charge, you're no longer in charge. And then the state, CAL FIRE maybe comes in, OES, and they're in charge. And then maybe the feds come in. And everyone has a different model and a different language, and you're trying to communicate in the midst of these changing dynamics, and just it complicates the situation. I mentioned this adaptively management is such a key part of a response. tactics versus strategy can help, and you need to be focused on the tactics in the immediacy of the response, but you do need to carve out a space to be thinking about tomorrow, next week, next month, whether it's business continuity or just your approach to deal with the different things that are arising. This is, there's maybe some folks have some experience with FEMA and projects. When you're working on a project, an event like this, where you're making just decisions moment to moment, do you get a contract in place to do what you need to do to bring your system back to some semblance, or do you go through the, at times, laborious efforts to ensure the contract's compliant with FEMA? And if you don't have a FEMA compliant contract, you have no hope to get reimbursement. At times you can't always wait for it. So it's a pretty complex issue. Fatigue in ways I never experienced sets in, and partly that's due to the adrenaline, and the notion of going home to sleep before your next shift is just a notion. And mistakes by day 2+ start to get made as everyone's fatigued, with the exception of firefighters, and obviously a completely new understanding and respect for their job, but they're able to amazingly come off the front lines, put their head on their helmet out in some parking lot, sleep for 4 hours and back at it. But all the other mortals were just fatigue really was a tough issue. The assignments and emergency operations centers, so many agencies like Santa Rosa, kind of takes a normal hierarchical structure and plops that into the FEMA emergency response structure in terms of kind of top dog at the top, and it flows down. And from my experience, it could be a fundamental flaw versus looking at skill sets. And really the operations folks are, in what I saw pretty across the board, are most adept at the actual response. And part of that is they're practiced at making day-to-day decisions, whether it's a main break and just responding to emergencies. And we're trying to work that into our model. Again, regional priorities and resources kind of get into who's in charge. Just because you think it's important, it may or may not be to the overall, as the incident command structure changes with the state and the federal agencies coming in. So when they come in, it's like the cavalry, and you're glad to see them because they bring resources and knowledge and expertise, but don't get in the way of the cavalry, right? So mutual aid, I mentioned the key component as an aspect of sorts of events. And I do share role of electeds as something that was a dynamic, and we struggled a bit, but obviously a key part you need to think about in your design. What is a role? And in our experience, after a couple of days, their role, it may sound light, but it really wasn't, was somewhat of a cheerleader for staff, and they would come in and talk to staff and at times serve food and that kind of stuff, just to keep the morale and energy going. And it was great. I put FEMA here. I could put this whole slide could be FEMA because it's a dominating issue in a response like this. So in terms of damage, a wildfire, most of our infrastructure is below ground pipes and largely unharmed. This is a water tank. You couldn't even tell the fire raged right through it. It was filled with 500,000 gallons of cold water, and that was a heat sink that protected it from the fire. In the front was a brand new fire station built well beyond code in terms of fire resistancy. So it just does kind of uniquely, the infrastructure generally for the water utility wasn't that damaged. We did lose a few sewer lift stations and pump stations. The crews were able to get out there very quickly with portable pumps and portable generators and kind of just get stuff going until we went through a rebuild process. Then unexpected things happened. This is just one example where This event occurred in October, and just a couple weeks later, we had a rather significant rainstorm, the first of the season. And the sinkholes were appearing all over where the fire had raged. And it took a little while to figure out what was going on. But it turned out our storm drain pipes there were made of HDPE, a plastic that's really industry standard for storm pipes. And for the most part, with all the creeks similar to here, the storm drains had kind of an extension that went into the creek. And as the fire raged up the creek, the plastic pipes caught fire and just burned all the way. So when the rain came, obviously there was no pipe, and we started getting these sinkholes everywhere. So that was another unexpected and pretty mad scramble replacing these pipes for the upcoming wet weather season. And we did have some minor damage to hydrants and some above ground meters and valves, some service lines that were really the only pipes that were damaged. They're the closest to the surface of the piping system. And there was a contamination issue I'm going to touch on in a minute. So the recovery, from a citywide perspective, debris cleanup is such a dominating issue, but even from a water utility, you may not be able to access some key facilities until they're determined safe due to hazardous materials or potential hazards in the debris as fires rage, right? Stuff burns. You can get a lot of concern about that, but it was not trivial in the need to get out there yet, being directed that we weren't able to. A real focus on rebuilding our infrastructure, of course, FEMA compliant to the extent. And of course, you need a lot of money and resources, and you're faced with an immediate loss of revenue from the businesses, hotels, hotel tax in our case, from the fire. And then you have watershed post-fire concerns, potential landslides, mud flows, that sort of things that can impact the community. And for us, we'd obviously be thinking about our drinking water reservoirs. And then there was just residual issues with fire-related contamination in the water system I'll touch on in a moment. A lot of rebuild coordination, of the many interesting things, the rebuild process. I mean, the typical building plan review process and even going through our system can seem long and frustrating to customers. Santa Rosa was able to turn that on its head and turn what could be a 6-month affair into days at times. And it just really able to streamline that. So transitioning to the water quality issue we had during the fire where we lost system pressure, we issued do not drink notices. As soon as we did the BACT analysis, we were able to lift those. So we didn't have any contamination. But after some evacuees came back, and this is an area called Fountain Grove in Santa Rosa, we had a very unusual taste and odor complaint. Staff went out there, saw a sheen on top. We analyzed it and found hydrocarbons in a very, very significant way. These are, if you can see on the right, benzene numbers, color-coded. And I believe the regulatory limit is 5 and 10, something like that, state and federal. And you can see we had areas that were over 500 with benzene, and benzene was only one of a whole number of constituents that we were found in the water. We were fortunately able to isolate this area. They had a advisory in place for just about a year. Do not drink, do not boil, do not take hot showers, don't wash dishes in hot water. It created, as you can imagine, a lot of difficulties and disruptions for about 300 residences. Some had burned down, the 350, but there were still some surviving houses where people were living in. We instituted kind of a principle-based approach to the investigation, absolute transparency that sounds, and it is absolutely the right thing. Sharing on our website all the constituents that were in the water, really alarmed is, of course, the residents within that and throughout the whole city. We went to hundreds of community meetings over the year, big and small, to continue to talk about this issue. Data-driven, and there were a lot of pushes, of course, by the community and to some extent politically to take some quick action and just replace all the pipes in the system. In the hope, anticipation, it'd be reimbursed by FEMA. We were able to, as you'll hear, not have to do that and also be adaptive and follow the data. So just very briefly, we looked at, okay, what are the possible sources? The industry, it's fairly well known. For example, if you have an underground leaking tank, you can have permeation through the plastic pipe. It didn't really make sense that occurred coincidentally with the fire, but that was still a possible source. Leaching of potentially there was a theory that some pipes heated up and caused some leaching, which is a possibility. And then a potential backflow. Was there some, refueling effort that got into the system directly? Atmospheric or other foreign materials got in through a pressure relief valve. We took thousands and thousands of samples, cost us a few $1 million in analysis over that year, kept labs busy throughout Western United States, because it really is all about the data and trying to understand what was going on. We took soil samples to rule out the old fuel tank, that kind of thing. Then we started to do material samples, and we did microscopy, you can see on the right, on pipe segments. And we were getting, we thought, some positive indications from flushing. We were doing a lot of flushing of the system. When in doubt, flush. And running clean water through the pipes, right? And so we found someone that could do a leach test and give them pieces of material that to understand how long it would take to leach this out and try align our timing and our flushing methodology with these tests. Ultimately, the source was essentially homes that burned down. If you think about throughout your house, every faucet, dishwasher, but if you think about the faucets have plastic washers, some are, just mostly plastic nowadays. As those burned and our system lost pressure, which allowed backflow from the contaminated water in the homes to come back into our system. And then plastic pipes have a propensity to adsorb with a D and absorb with a B contamination onto them. So coat them and pull that contamination in. And service lines were the predominant source. But by flushing, we were able to start to see trends coming down. And we did do some targeted replacement of service lines and some mains, and were able to really resolve the issue through this effort that went on about a year. So, summary, adaptive management. I mean, there's a lot here. Key to emergency response. This one size fits all in a way. FEMA emergency response structure does take tweaking to fit a particular agency and company, as well as during the actual emergency. Routine drills are essential to preparedness. And then lessons from the contamination, and we shared this, for example, with Paradise and others. Flush, and unfortunately Paradise, for a whole lot of reasons, didn't take it, and they were faced with wholesale pipe replacement and sample for organic contamination and maintain public trust and confidence, obviously, when you have a water quality issue of this magnitude. And now the state of California and US EPA is instructing communities when they have a large fire to immediately do hydrocarbon sampling that before the Santa Rosa effort had never been identified. And truly, we would never have understood all this, but for that one taste and odor complaint that came in. So, that's my presentation. If there's any comments or questions or.
Amazing.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Ben. That was,
I have a question, Cynthia. I have a question. Ben, did you say you guys thought that the VOCs came back through the system from the houses? Is that what I heard you say?
Yeah. So if you think about it, you have a big 3-story house or something like that, and you have water in the pipes, and all your fixtures burn. And as they're burning, you burn plastics, you get all
Yeah,
kinds
sure.
of toxics, and that flowed back into, and most of it was pulled out in the service line. So then, but we had contamination through this whole neighborhood. And that neighborhood was one of the neighborhoods where we did get a significant loss of pressure for an extended period. So it's not, I'd say, Larry, 100% conclusive, but all things align that was ultimately.
Well, that's interesting. So you were unable to supply water. Basically, that was the root issue. Had the water flowed normally, right?
Right.
It would have just been spurting like the gas. It's spurting out everywhere, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
It was
that's
pressure
interesting.
loss combined with this issue. Exactly.
Yeah. I told you I worked at that Catholic school, St. Rose or something like that, and that's the one where the sprinklers came on, the water went off, then the water came on, and they got drowned by the sprinklers, because they had all opened, but they never got closed off. It was a little tricky. Yeah, it's, I heard a absolutely perfect analogy to the fire system. My assessment of the Santa Rosa fires was that one house catches on fire, we send 5 fire trucks. 500 catches or 5,000 catch on fire, we don't know what to do. All we turn into is rescue. And it's exactly parallel to the COVID situation with the hospitals. One patient gets sick, no problem. 500 get sick, big problem. What it seems to me is we should probably rethink our emergency response. Like I say, we're real good at one thing happening. When you get 500 happening at the same time, then we don't look so good. Our plans are a little shaky, seems to me.
okay.
Armando, did
So,
you?
and when you say it was the service lines, are you talking about the laterals?
Yeah, there they call them service lines, here laterals. Yeah, the small pipe feeding the homes. And also on the back side of the meter coming from the main. But actually, primarily it was from the main to the meter.
Those are all plastic in Santa Rosa?
Yeah, for the most part. There were some copper, and on the copper lines, you did get some of the material stick, but it was nowhere near what we saw on the plastic.
And don't we require copper in Marin, or
Yeah, I
On
believe
lateral.
my standard, is that right?
I think we.
Well, we've used plastic too, because I did a lawsuit here a long time ago on polybutylene.
Right.
So there have been times when, because it's expensive, Larry, to put in copper. So
But that's
there have been
I've
plastic
done-
has taken a shot at it, but that's because I presume because they had no water flow, then they all evaporated, huh? So all the pipes are empty. So,
Right.
It's probably even worse.
Right.
If it had just set with water, you'd probably been okay. And they're PVC?
Yes. The
Yeah.
problematic ones were PVC.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that would be a bad situation. And so they'd have to replace all the laterals too?
Yeah, we did go and replace all laterals, but we didn't have to replace the entire system, mains and everything else.
See, if you just had those lead pipes, everything would have been fine.
Did Santa Rosa pass any code amendments to address the contamination or the fire?
Well, their new standard was copper at the time, but a lot of these homes were built before that was their standard. It was interesting. I started to think about, the big lesson learned of these, sprinkler systems, if there'd be a way to have some kind of sensor with, you have that sort of pressure drop, and it would be an automatic shutoff, kind of like an earthquake for gas systems.
Right.
And as I think about it, the fire chief said, "Yeah, it's a great idea until one doesn't work."
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's a life safety feature, and so things are complicated.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be a hard sell past the insurance folks.
Yeah.
ISO would go crazy over that. Did you get reimbursed for the pipes?
I think they're still working through the details. I mean, boy, but there was some money that came in initially, and all different paths. But I'd say they aren't yet finally concluded, and feel like there's still some money due to them that's somewhat being debated. And then there's a clawback thing with FEMA too. You get the money early, but then if the reviewer's fine, right, so you have to make these decisions.
Just like insurance companies, it's interesting. You didn't seem to have the problem East Bay Mud had in the Oakland fire, that the pipes exploded underground. Do you remember that? The plastic pipes were developed steam, and then they just blew them out of the ground.
Yeah.
I'd never seen anything like that one you showed of that burnt PVC. I mean, that was not exposed, right? That's always was covered,
Right.
the whole time. Yeah,
right.
That's really weird.
Okay, other comments on this item, which is an informational item, so there's no board action, but I just want to make sure there's no other board comments before we see if there's any public comments. Okay, any public comments on this item?
Yes, Vice President Kohler, we have one comment. It's from the Marin Conservation League.
Oh, well, it's Larry Minikis. Good evening, all. I did want to make it in time for public comment, but I was in the car and I was listening and I couldn't figure out where the button was to raise it. So I was like, but I do want to comment. Forget it. Ben, thank you. That was an excellent presentation, and it's so invaluable to get it from your personal perspective, and we need that here. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm the only one commenting tonight. On top of it, I'm thinking we have to have hundreds or maybe thousands of people be able to see this. So, I'm working with the MWPA. I'm part of the Bell Coles group. We're the steering committee on putting this all together. And we're working with Fire Safe Marin. We're doing a lot with creating videos. And so I'm going to pass this on so that they see your video, and somehow we want to incorporate this. We need to get more people to see what you just presented. It's just because it's real. This is what happened. This is what we went through. This is what happened on day 2, on day 3. And no one knows, no one understands what we're facing. And you have been through it, and Santa Rosa has been through it. And we have to keep reminding the community of what is going to come and how it is so important that we all prepare. And on that, again, I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Larry.
My pleasure.
Any public comment on this item?
I have no more public comment on this item, but I would like to mention that emailed comments on non-agenda items were provided to the board and will be posted on the website later.
Great, thank you. Okay, if there's no objection, I'm going to move on now. And thank you again, Ben. It really was extraordinary. And I just want to emphasize Larry Minika's point. I think the more that we can make this available to the public through the website or other means, I think that would be great. So we're going to move on to item 6, the Azalea Hill Trail Restoration Project update and funding agreement.
Good evening, board members. Sean Horn, Watershed Resources Manager. We put together a brief presentation on this item for you tonight. So we'll go over the project and the status of the project to date, and then also the status of our funding from the EMIG Trust to help us fund one of the more significant structures on the project over the Bone Tempe Creek from Bullfrog Road. So give me one moment and I'll open the presentation. Right, so this can be an update on the Azalea Hill Trail Restoration Project and our funding status. So we're going to go over review the project phases for this, and then highlight the Bullfrog Bridge that we're working on and the EMIG funding that we're matching with funding from the Mount Tam Fund, and then also the benefits of the project for reducing trail impacts and how this is enhancing biodiversity. And then we have a second grant from the California Conservation North Bay to help us with phase 2 of the project. So we'll do a brief overview of the work that's going on there, and then also highlight some of the temporary signage we've developed for the project. And that was it's something that we were able to do with our partnership with OneTam, who received a private donation to help support the design and development of that. And that will ultimately feed into our final kiosks for the project. So as a reminder, here's the 3 phases that we've broken the project up into. We have phase 1 that goes up and over Azalea Hill, which is a hiking and equestrian route. And we have phase 2, which is what was previously called the Fisherman's Trail segment. And then we have the 3rd phase, which is the Liberty Gulch segment. And you'll recall that at last month's board meeting, the board approved a resolution for a grant that we applied to for that 3rd phase, the Liberty Gulch. So what we're working on this year is the phase 2. We've got CC&B currently working with us, and then we were also working on the bridge, which is going to be located at the intersection of that yellow line and that green line that'll take us from Bullfrog Road over Bontempe Creek and to Azalea Hill proper. So the bridge itself is a really critical component. It's going to be our new entryway into this trail route. We're being able to fund this through a generous donation from the EMIG Trust. We're working on finalizing the agreement with them. They've received the final agreement and are working through it. We hope to have that fully in place in about 2 weeks. We also made a disbursement from the Mount Tam Fund in the amount of $75,000, which allowed us to solicit proposals for the construction of the bridge. The bridge is being constructed off-site, and it was the contract was awarded to the lowest bidder, which was Bridge Brothers. Excuse me. The bridge is going to be a 6.5-foot wide bridge that's 80 feet long. It's going to allow us to completely span the channel, and that'll bring users out of the creek, because currently where they're crossing through the creek and into a wetland area. So one of the critical components of this project is we'll actually be point downstream, closer to the reservoirs, which is a slightly wider section of the stream, but the benefit of that is that it'll take our users out of a wetland, which I'll show you in a moment. So that's the bridge. It'll look good when it's out there. That's an example of the exact bridge that we'll be getting. It'll be a significant effort to get the bridge in. We'll have to crane it in 2 pieces, and we'll have to start working on the foundations here shortly, and then we'll be installing the bridge in October is the plan at the moment. So what that bridge is going to allow us to do is really take users out of this wetland feature. So this is dry in the summer, but in the winter, this is a really nice, moist zone that we really want to bring users out of, so that we can kind of reduce this impact of trail use and soil compaction, and then also allow for the native plants to reestablish in these zones. So this is a really critical component. And when this project is complete, we'll have enhanced about 0.245 acres of wetland through our measures to move users out of these sensitive areas. So the photo on the top is going to be our new approach towards the future bridge site. And that's looking from the Azalea Hill side of the creek. So that'll be how you approach it, and you can see it's going through an upland area rather than the wetland feature. If you look at photo 6, this is an example of how when we adopted the project, we looked for opportunities to finalize our route that will avoid sensitive resources. So one of those sensitive resources is the hairy bird's beak, which is a small plant that exists only in California. It's locally rare. There's a number of populations along the trail route, and the current trail goes through a number of these populations. And this is an example where the existing route goes to the right side of that oak tree, and that's through in a population of the hare's bird beak. And the new route is going to go slightly towards the creek more and on the other side of the oak tree, and it'll allow us to completely avoid that. And then we'll decommission through passive means that section that goes through the population. So one of the critical components is really decommissioning some of these social trails as well. There's a number of feeder trails off of this section of trail that we're working on this summer. So we put up trail closure signs on those social trails that'll allow rangers to actually enforce the closure in those zones. And you can see an example of that in photo 5, just some of the small signs that have been placed along the route. So in addition to the bridge that we'll be working on this summer, we're also working on phase 2 with the help of the California Conservation Corps North Bay. In that section, we have another 6 crossings that we'll be working on, and those will be small bridges and punch-ins that we'll construct with the Conservation Corps themselves. They're currently working with us on brushing the new alignment of the trail, and then we're working on the new tread as well, and we'll look at that in just a second. But this is an example of how this overall is really going to benefit the resources on the watershed by getting users up and out of those stream crossings. Currently, when you walk this segment, you are going down and into the streams, and so these features will help us reduce the overall impact of our users on our watershed. Here's an example of our crews out in front of the CC&B crews. So the CC&B crews have gone through and brushed the new alignment after our pre-construction surveys were all completed. And then we've been doing the rough grading. And an example of kind of the benefits of this kind of project is in photo 8, you can see as the old trail is approaching our small excavator that we have there, there was starting to be some trail erosion. And due to that trail erosion or incision, users were starting to go around that section, which was widening the overall impact of the trail and the use there. So this project will help create a multi-use path that is more sustainable and beneficial for resources in this segment of the watershed. In addition to the trail work, we've been working with OneTam to develop some new signage that really demonstrates and provides information to our users about the benefits, as well as some of the new new closed areas. So on the top of Azalea Hill, where we have most of these social trails, we will be looking to install more trail closures in those smaller feeder routes that go through some of the sensitive areas on the top of Azalea Hill. So these signs are currently out on the project sites. We have one at Azalea Hill parking lot proper, and then we have 2 at both ends of the phase 2 project site. When we are done with the project this summer, we'll be installing permanent kiosks that follow our just standard kiosk design, and we'll be installing those at the Azalea Hill parking lot as well as down by the Bullfrog Bridge that we're working on currently. So as I mentioned, this was a benefit to the project in general, that OneTam was able to get a private donation to help fund the design and development of these, as well as the printing. And so that was for the temporary signs as well as for the permanent kiosks. And then we'll be working with Eagle Scout teams to actually develop and build those kiosks where these will permanently be installed. So that's the general overview and update on the project and where we're at to date. So I'll take any questions that board members might have regarding the project.
Great. That was a very helpful presentation, Sean. Do we have any board questions or comments on the presentation?
I do. Sean, are we going to do any improvements to the approaches to the new trail?
Are you thinking
from Sky Oaks, right? And then you can also approach it from Bon Tempe parking lot?
Right. At this point, we don't have any planned improvements. We will probably do some additional rocking of the road that's currently there if we expect more use. And then also at the approach of the new bridge that's going to be going in, we'll definitely be doing some improvements.
Right. The Sky Oaks approach is pretty funky, but.
Yeah, there's a little areas. We can look at that. Some of them we're down to bedrock in some zones that are a little tougher to work with.
Yeah.
That's a good suggestion, Larry.
Thanks.
Hi, Sean. That was a very interesting presentation. Is that bridge steel or wood?
Correct, steel.
It's steel with just the wood's that's good. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, so it'll be a steel bridge, Larry, and then we'll have redwood decking.
Cool. Because, it could burn pretty easily, huh?
Sean, when you get across the bridge to the Fisherman's Trail, there's a lot of newts and stuff that you see on the trail during wet weather. Mm-hmm. So can we put in little pipes or anything under there so they don't all get squashed?
We will look into that, Mr. Bragman. Part of the problem is trying to get the newts to go into those as well. But we can think about it.
Yeah.
Just go here. Yeah.
I've heard of other agencies using wildlife refuge to avoid that fate.
Yeah, absolutely. I worked on a project in Santa Rosa where we did it under Stony Point Road for the tiger salamander. That was a critical one, but the road was a bit bigger than what we're building here.
Okay. Just
Did you see that one about the coyote that led the skunk through the drain pipe under the freeway? He went out and got him and said, follow me, follow me. And he does, he follows him. They both go through the drain pipe. One of the things we ran into, which could well happen here, is the last time I did something like that, Fish and Wildlife required us to put lights in the tunnel. Just FYI. So they didn't want to get it too dark for them crossing through there. That was for fish, but it's a similar idea.
Okay, well,
Just FYI.
it's a pretty rich habitat, as I'm sure Sean knows. So,
You know what might work better is something like an open grading with a channel. Might be easier for them to walk through, and still get daylight. And it's an interesting idea. They're not very swift movers, huh?
and they slither. And walk,
Yeah,
right?
and they have a low line of vision. I don't know that they can see too much, but maybe we put a little girl newt in there and they'll come after her or something. Get their interest. Something that would get them involved in going in there.
Something like that might work.
Some kind of attraction for them.
Okay.
I think it's a great project, Sean, so I really appreciate it. So,
Yeah, agreed. Any other board comments on this item? Okay, do we have,
Nice job, Sean. Nice job. Thank you.
sorry. Are there any public comments for this item?
Yes, we have one, Larry Minikes.
It's good I was muted. I could not stop laughing. I'm envisioning these lighted new tunnels with this nice soft red light and with a girly sign on the other end, like in Beetlejuice.
Now you got it. Yeah. Now it's working.
But what might work better is just getting the schools again to do a sign that says, if you see newts on the trail, please move them off. Some cute
That's a good
signs to
idea.
wake up the
That's a good
consciousness
idea.
of these bikers and such that will, and get the kids to do it again and put up some signs and say, this is really a newt sensitive area. And
Would it make sense, Larry, to put a speed bump there?
a newt bump? I don't know. I don't know where the newts are. They're spread out. I mean, I've been moving newts. Seriously, I've been moving newts off the fire road for decades. Every time I come across one, I move them. So anyway, that's not really what I wanted to speak about. Sean, I don't recall if equestrians are being allowed on the trail as well.
Yeah, so there's two routes. One, phase 2 and phase 3 are multi-use route. Those will allow for hikers, bikers, and equestrians. The route up and over Azalea Hill will be for hiking and equestrians.
Yeah. So if there's any bridges involved, the Catawba Bridge or any of the puncheons, Robert Eichstadt pointed out on Bill's trail, there's a number of bridge crossings that they didn't consider equestrian use. So they didn't have sideboards. So if it's wet and the hoof slips, it could slip off the side there. Even if there's a guardrail, the hoof could still. So he brought up that, and so I might suggest just showing the designs to the equestrian community and making sure that if there are any, that they're on board with it. And
That's a good idea.
Yeah, a great presentation. I really appreciate it. And the fact that I went on one of the tours, I can envision where all these structures and such and the work you're doing is going. So that was really valuable. So thanks so much.
Seems like, Sean, we could put up some newt crossing signs too, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. We can do that. We have some that we just recently replaced at Lake Lagunitas. And I'll just say that I did skip over the fact that the designs that we're using for the puncheons and the small bridges are all U.S. Forest Service designs, and they do have the equestrian bar along the edge, and they are being designed for the loading to support it.
good.
Okay.
Good.
Do we have any other public comments?
I do not see any more comments. Vice President Kohler.
If there aren't any further board comments, I think we're moving on to item 7. Schedule and agenda items.
So if I may, Ben, just to briefly introduce it, that before you are the future agenda, the future meeting schedule and agenda items. As you may already know, that the Communications Committee was canceled. Communications Committee meeting was canceled for August 19th. But your upcoming items are your regular bi-monthly Board of Directors meeting on August 18th, your Operations Committee on August 21st, your Finance Committee on August 27th, and then again, you'll have your regular bi-monthly September 1st. Are there any
Director
questions?
Kohler,
Oh, sorry.
Director Kohler, Jeannie will coordinate with you and talk about the items and if we want to reschedule that or try and fit them into other meetings. But she'll have a conversation with you as committee chair.
Yeah, that sounds great. We'll do that.
Perfect.
All right. Any board comments on this item? Any public comments on this item?
There are no public comments on this item.
Then I believe we are concluded at the end of our agenda and we are adjourned.
Cool.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good night.
Bye, everybody.